Adding multiple layers is what can give your designs depth and interest. Hey there, Sandy here. Today I'm going to show you several tips and tricks for making pretty jewelry pieces using supplies from the BLING Create Along Box. So I'm starting out with just some plain polymer clay. Here are a few pieces I made using supplies from the BLING box. More about them in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do to add depth is actually use some of this simple leaf that was included in your box to give our first layer of depth. And you can see the difference in these two pieces. This one is just plain blue polymer clay, and this one has the gold mixed in. And it gives this beautiful all over sparkle, kind of like a starry night sky. These two pieces, by the way, were made with the mold that comes in the box, although I'm not using those for my main pieces. You can mix in as much of this gold leaf as you want. I've got about a 1-inch ball of clay, and I'm going to put in, maybe a quarter, half of a sheet. And you can just kind of press it. This simple leaf is really easy to work with. It doesn't fly away quite like real gold leaf. So you just press it on both sides and then mix it either by hand or in your pasta machine. The important thing is that you don't mix it all the way through. You want to leave it so that you see these little sparkles. And when you find an area that you really like the look of, then stop. So here's my piece of clay with just some of the gold leaf mixed in. You can see how pretty it is. This also looks really nice if you use translucent clay. You can see through and see the depth in it. Next, we're going to use the Starburst Stencil that came in the BLING box. And I'm just going to lay this over my piece of clay. And of course you could do a whole big slab here if you wanted to. I'm just doing a little piece. And I'm just rolling over it lightly. I want to embed this somewhat in the clay, so maybe they're almost level. Next I'll take my sheet of leaf, and they come on these handy backer sheets that hold them. It's one reason it's called simple leaf, because it's just really simple to use. You'll know the difference if you've ever tried using real gold leaf. And I'm just rubbing, and I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I can start to see where all my little openings are. If you want, you can try using a ball tool, but be careful. You can't dent it too much. Like on this one, I don't know how well you can see. I sort of dented those a little too heavily, I think. So don't get too excited with your tool. It's just a way of helping you get good contact. But if you press it in firmly enough with the acrylic roller, you should be able to get good contact just with your fingers. So press and rub until you can feel and kind of see all of those openings. It helps to be a little bit familiar with your stencil if you have a different design, so you know where all the openings are. Leave your stencil in place and then just peel up the foil or leaf. And now start rubbing with your fingers. And what you're trying to do is remove everything that isn't over a stencil opening. And what you might want to do is rub in lots of different ways. So go in circles, go in one direction. If there's an area that isn't filled in, like that little tip of that starburst, you can just grab a piece of leaf that wasn't used elsewhere and rub that in. It might be getting a little bit crackled, but that's okay. If you want, you can go over it. You can grab a few more pieces of this and fill in areas, but I'm not worried about that because it's going to be crackled anyways the way I'm doing it. So now you can gently remove your stencil, and isn't that cool? And I think it's so pretty with the sparkly gold background. Scrubbing this gently with a nail brush will remove any of the excess from your stencil. Now this is slightly raised, and if you want to stop here, you can leave it like this with this raised texture, but I want to silkscreen over this, so I am going to flatten it. I'm just going to use a piece of deli paper, and again, start rubbing in the same manner, just small circles all over. And once you get it mostly flattened, you can come in with your roller, and you'll notice that it's crackling more, which is perfectly fine with me. The more you rub it, if you stretch it out, you're going to get more crackles. So you could stretch it out a lot and get even a bit more of an abstract design. You could use 2 different colors of leaf, so you'd have a different color of sparkle in the background as you have for your motifs from your stencil. Now I have found when you're doing things with layered designs like this, that having at least 3 layers looks best. You can keep going and add more. And you have different options too for how you colors that you use for your silk screen. This one is done with silver paint, and it's a lot more subtle than these ones that are done with white paint. The slick side of the Create Along silk screens goes down against your clay. I think I'll just put this on like this, and I'm just going to rub that lightly with my roller so there's good contact and I get a nice crisp silk screened image. I'm just going to use some plain old white acrylic paint. And I recommend getting in the habit, whoops, what a mess, of, first of all, clean off your paint bottle. I don't do that much, you can tell. Should do it more. Apply plenty of paint and go for just doing a single swipe. I think you get a cleaner result, and it's good practice for the time when you won't be doing it on polymer, you'll be doing it on something else, and the only way to get a clean design is to do just one swipe. Now you notice I took the top off my bottle because all this paint is not going to be used. One swipe, and now I can just put most of it back in my bottle. Let's see what we got. Cool. So there's our 3 layers, and you could keep going and add more. You could do pan pastels, all kinds of things. Of course, make sure you wash your silk screen right away, because if that paint dries in there, that silk screen is ruined. Now while this is drying, let me show you another option. This one, as I showed, has divots from my ball tool. I went in a little bit too hard, but in this case I silk screened first and then went over with the stencil and the leaf afterwards, and you get just a slightly different look. So the stars are more prominent on this side than on this side. My paint is all dry, and now I'm ready to proceed adding more layers or cutting this out and baking it into shapes. This is a cutter from Create Along you could use. It makes a nice shape, but what if you want something a little bit smaller? These pieces were cut with the exact same cutter. Here's a cool trick for you. Now let's say I want to cut maybe some nice long earrings with a shapely edge. I'm actually going to cut this piece in half and show you a cool trick for using the cutter. Well, first of all, I'll show you this one. So let's say here's my piece and I want this. All you do is you cut one shape and then you just scooch it over to wherever you want it and cut your other shape. So these both are slightly different sizes, and of course they're smaller than that one, but they were all cut with this cutter. To make a pair of earrings, I'm just going to cut this in half, because if you cut them at the same time, then you get the other cut edge that you're not using, so that causes problems. So I'll line this up to have about half of that shape. If you need to, use an acrylic block to really get good contact, especially with these older Create Along cutters. Actually, their newer ones are pretty good. They've made them sharper, so you don't have this issue quite so much. But with the older ones, you may need to come in when you're all done just with a craft knife and trim away that little bit of extra clay that stays under this thick edge. now I can just move this to wherever I want. Okay. And a little bit of cleaning up of the edges, and you could even make them skinnier, however you like. You could have this little tiny shape. And repeat to make your second earring or shape. And speaking of little tiny shapes, don't waste all of this. Now, where I cut it in half, there might be less opportunity to use it, but if you have a small cutter set, like this Sculpey Mini Geometric set, you can, you can get a surprising number of pieces out of one slab, and then you can use them in different combinations. These were all cut from the same slab where I cut this one out, and it wasn't much bigger than what you saw me start with, so I cut out a bunch of shapes. And if you want it double-sided like I did here, so you don't have to add a second backing and bake it, so it's just this single thickness, which is the thickest of my pasta machine, then you can just flip it over. Once your paint is dry, just flip it over like onto a piece of paper. Make sure it's completely dry, and then do whatever you want to the other side. And then you have double-sided. There you go. You can add a little crystal, like the 5mm Hot Fix crystals that came in your Bling box. Combine these together into all different kinds of jewelry. And by the way, these scraps, don't throw them out. Just because they have paint and gold leaf mixed in there, I will just mix this entire thing together and use it without any problems whatsoever. So I hope you've gotten some useful tips. Once again, this is Sandy Huntress for Create Along, wishing you happy creating.